Sometimes developers make games and people go well, actually not sometimes. A lot of the time, but what only happens sometimes is when the games that people do that with aren't anything but deserving of that reaction. Hi folks, it's Falcon, and today on Game 10 games that were expected to fail hard part 2. So if you're interested, we did a list like this already. Included The Witcher: A Demon's Souls, Sonic Frontiers, Metroid Prime, Doom 2016, the Mario Rabbids Kingdom Battle game, the Silent Hill remake Silent Hill 2. It's actually, I think, an interesting video if this is a sub-subject that interests you. So if you're aching for more of this after you're done with head over to that one. A lot of demonstrative pronouns in that sentence. Let's start this one off at no. 10 with Red Dead Redemption. It sounds ridiculous now, I mean seriously. Who on earth thought a open world game would be anything other than a massive hit? I have receipts. There were analysts at the time who seriously thought was going to be a massive bomb. The analyst in question is Michael Pachter, who, if you know anything about him, you know he lives in opposite land, and if he predicts something, the opposite is probably going to come out. Red Dead is not a fluke with this man. It was actually pretty. Far from the only person with reservations about Red Dead Redemption. Rockstar themselves thought the game possibly wouldn't turn a profit. They literally put out a statement saying the game may not be financially viable. It was gonna be a game that existed. To prove how talented the team at Rockstar San Diego, if you put out a press release saying your game's not going to turn a profit, you're either a total madman or you don't have any confidence in the mainstream potential of your cowboy game. Rockstar San Diego, they are actually very talented. Which is why Red Dead Redemption turned out to be an incredible game. And it went on to be a massive sales success. But before that outcome, everybody saw it as a pretty risky game. It was a sequel to Red Dead Revolver, a game most people even at the time didn't remember or care about. And cowboy games in general were never really considered to be big sellers. Do you think there's a lot of cowboy games? No, and it's because you can't make a lot of money making cowboy games by default. And also, let's just go ahead and say cowboy movies hadn't been box office hits in decades. You had a few strays from time to time, but not often. Another thing to keep in mind is that at least back in 2010, being a game from Rockstar didn't guarantee it was gonna sell gangbusters. This was back when Rockstar was making side games every so often, and they all did moderately well at very least. But nothing came close to the sales of Grand Theft Auto. People knew GTA, but weren't immediately coming out to play anything else Rockstar put out. Of course, anyone who actually watched the trailers knew Red Dead was going to be something special. But just looking at it purely from a cold business standpoint, I can see why there was concern the game wouldn't make back its budget. Completely wrong. But I at least see where the naysayers were coming from. And no, 9 is Helldivers 2. Here's another good game up, where I mean, the actual quality of the product wasn't Helldivers really was quite Helldivers to look even better. But that doesn't necessarily mean that a game's gonna be a success. The original Helldivers did well enough. It had a small but dedicated community, but it never really managed to break through into the mainstream. It was kind of always a respected but niche thing. So people's expectations for the sequel were moderate at best. Sales-wise, there were a lot of fans saying the switch from top-down to third-person was hurt the sales of the game, or at least alienate the current game's audience. I don't know, it didn't really get a lot of coverage up till release, and it was always seen as kind of an outsider when Helldivers released and was an instant massive success. It came as a surprise to a lot of people. And here's the thing, if you were playing a beta before the release, you knew it was gonna be something special. There's a lot of fantastic multiplayer and co-op games that fall into obscurity, but Helldivers 2 really did make it work. It's got the goofy presentation, the chaotic gameplay, or constantly evolving narrative that actually makes good use of the live service which is, format. I mean, almost nothing that is live service does that. The thing with Helldivers 2 is I think most people predicted, I mean, if they predicted anything about the game was that it would probably do okay. Maybe even a little better than but okay. Nobody could possibly see how much of a success this thing was going to be. And also plenty of people thought it would just fail. Just to be clear, it's a sequel to a pretty old game that wasn't a hit. And it ended up being the third highest selling video game of last year, beating out Madden 25 and Elden Ring. And Elden Ring at no 8 is the Alan Wake series. In comparison to the two previous games, the Alan Wake franchise never made blockbuster numbers. But the fact they were able to make any money on these games at all is surprising, given just how difficult the entire development, the original game ended up being, and how unlikely the prospect of a sequel was. And to be clear, the series is a success. Alan Wake took years to recoup the cost of development only happened after they released the PC version in 2012. And Alan Wake sales exceeded 2 million copies, and it managed to make back its development cost by February of 2025. It took a while, but the game did turn a profit. It's that kind of a series, honestly. Slow burn, but rewind back to the days leading up to the release of the first game. I blame you for assuming it was dead on arrival. Took 6 years to develop, took constant delays. Overall, significantly less ambitious game than the original concept. It just left a lot of people pessimistic about the game's chances. The original Animal was gonna be an open world game. It was planned to be much bigger than it ended up being. But Remedy quickly realized they bit off way more than they could chew. And were forced to remove huge chunks of the game to get it finished. When it came out, opinions were fairly positive, but they did not have the juice they have now, so word of mouth spread pretty slowly. And by the time the PC version finally dropped, people were finally ready to embrace it. And even then, it wasn't enough to justify a sequel. They took a totally different game, Control, to finally get people hyped about a potential follow-up. Now, just to be clear, Control is freaking awesome. It is one of my favorite games, period. That was the Alan Wake series, but man, is it a banger. And it had a great DLC that had everything to do with Alan Wake and made the whole thing into a connected universe. Basically, man, did it make Alan Wake to a necessity? Like, there's so much to talk about the UPS like American Nightmare. The original Alan Wake to teaser, the From Quantum Break. It's a series Remedy clearly has a lot of love and only able to find true success, piggybacking off of their breakthrough hit Control, which by the way is getting a sequel, and I can't wait to play it. And no, 7 is Neo. The fact that Neo exists at all is impressive. That it's actually good. It's a minor miracle the original version of Neo was announced in 2004. 13 years before it came out in 2017. That's nearly as long as Duke Nukem. That was in development for 14 years, and any game being made for that long is probably gonna be a mess. Especially back when it was announced. The average turnaround on a game, especially this type of a game, was 2 or 3 years. There was little reason to believe in Team Ninja at this point. At their last Ninja Gaiden game was an absolute disaster. And everything else they worked on failed to turn the needle. Outside of the Dead or Alive and done games, well. Let's just say certain aspects of the games lent themselves to overpriced DLC bundles. And that was kind of grinding that series into the ground. Handled that pretty tactfully, didn't I? Team Ninja had fallen far from the days of Ninja Gaiden Black. Expectations on Neo were pretty low. Even when early feedback started up, there were plenty of people in the gaming community just assumed Neo was gonna be a disaster. Kind of me included, not necessarily a disaster. I was kind of in the same camp as a lot of people looking at it like, this looks a bit like a Dark Souls knockoff. And not in the way that this was becoming a genre, but in the way that it looked like, oh, Team Ninja is just trying to copy Dark Souls because they don't have anything going. The context didn't exactly make it look great. Of course, the game finally came out and proved the naysayers and haters wrong. It's a fantastic game that manages to stand out as its own unique thing. As of May 2025, the franchise has sold more, making it one of the most successful games in the genre. And no, 6 is Deus Ex a legendary game now, but there were basically no expectations for this. Back in the year 2000, struggling not to use NBC intellectual property Conan here, but it did finally manage to come out after some high-profile delays. To be frank, this is a game that had everything working against it. Struggled to incorporate RPG elements into the Unreal engine, which was of course primarily built for shooters at the time. The game Unreal begat the engine Unreal. Their AI ambitions fell apart, and early feedback was mostly negative. Their plans were overly ambitious. Their environments were too big. Their focus on realism was getting in the way. And they were having trouble making a fun game. Even when they started tightening up the design and focusing on what worked, their publisher DOS tried pressuring the team to turn the game into a traditional with FPS. No immersive sim elements. That would have been a terrible decision. Awful. Just the worst, I mean. Think about the immersive shit sim genre if this game never happened. But outside observers didn't really have a reason to be excited. Previous games had bombs. Dominion 3 was reviewed poorly. Daikatana reviewed poorly. It's because it's poor, and while I personally love Anachronox, it's one of my favorite 90s games. It sold worse than the other two. There was little reason to be excited about another Ironstorm game. Stay here, I could use an ally inside Oniko. Good idea, I can keep you on phone, do that, but be careful. You know what they do to spies. I will, by the way. The lab finally sent the augmentation canister even with the highly respected war inspector running the project. When the game finally did come out, everyone pretty much immediately recognized the game's managed to win over 30 Best of awards in 2001. In terms of sales, the game never really blew up. The original is a cult classic that managed to spawn a pretty successful franchise. I'd say it did well enough. And no, 5 is the Simpsons hit and run in 2003. Nobody was expecting anything good out of this thing. It was a tie-in game. The team's previous attempted a Simpsons driving game, Simpsons Road Rage, which was mediocre. It didn't just get low review scores either. It also got a Sega lawsuit alleging it was a rip-off of Crazy Taxi, which it was at least in the court of public opinion. I don't know if I agree that Sega had the right to sue over it. Like, honestly, if a genre of Crazy Taxi-likes happened, I wouldn't be upset. Kind of a weirdly litigious response, but whatever. Perhaps more important was that by 2003 into the bad seasons of The Simpsons, so there was a lot working against the game's seriously. I went back and checked the episodes. Around the time this game was released, I can't recognize a single one of them. It was a dire time for this series' development. As per usual with games on this list, it was also fraught with difficulties. It was originally planned as a basic road, but the lawsuit meant they had to rework the in-development game. Stuff like on-foot segments, which in retrospect made the game way better. Many in the development staff assumed this thing was just gonna be a bomb. They were failing to meet deadlines. The game was unstable through most of the development. Huge chunks of it were cut. Everyone on staff assumed it was just gonna be a mess. Most industry observers said the same. They were just expecting another disappointing Simpsons tie-in game. That's totally awesome. So when they finally managed to finish it, and it ended up reviewing pretty well and being pretty popular, it kind of came as a surprise to everybody. It was an actually good Simpsons game. That wasn't called The Simpsons Arcade. And no, for is Alien Isolation, a game I remember a lot of people having super low expectations. There were a lot of red flags. The long development time, the fact it was being developed by Creative Assembly, they make Total War, real-time strategy games, not like Alien franchise horror game, like licensed movie horror game, whatever. It was also a game based on the Alien franchise from Sega, after Sega had just put out the endlessly burning tire fire. That is Aliens Colonial Marines. Aliens Colonial, sorry. It's impossible to say that game without laughing a little. Colonial Marines, everyone wanted a good Alien game too. And the things that Creative Assembly were saying about and survival gameplay, they sounded good. But it was hard to believe. They'd actually follow through on this stuff. There's plenty of games where the director's vision is frankly great. The actual game is nothing like what they described. It's like pretty much every other game. Pretty much every other game I've described so far. It sounds like the development on Isolation did not go smoothly. There were things that did change, like a planned acid blood feature that got cut. The game was originally third person. For a big chunk of its development. But it sounds like the folks that worked on this thing had a pretty solid vision. The challenge was just getting people behind it. Leading up to release, the hype and positivity got a lot louder. But I still remember a lot of naysayers who just did not think Creative Assembly to make a game like this. All signs pointed toward the game possibly being a dud, but it was actually really damn good. A little divisive, to be fair, but the craft was there. This is a proper Alien in a way game. Nothing else up to this point had ever managed. The team that did it went on to do pretty much nothing else other than the upcoming sequel that is maybe still happening, hopefully. Moving on to No. 3, it's Tales from the Borderlands. The story of Telltale's unexpected rise and swift and sudden fall is a sad one because in many ways, these guys were real pioneers in the storytelling of video games. Choices didn't matter as much as the games wanted you to feel like they mattered. And there were a few legitimate stinkers, but along the way there were a lot of real nice unexpected surprises, like Tales of the Borderlands. A Telltale Borderlands game sounds like it would be an absolute disaster on paper. So what you're telling me is that they're gonna make a Borderlands game and take out all the things people like about Borderlands, like the guns and the shooting and the and on top of that, the stuff that you're leaving in, the stuff people don't particularly love. The kind of cringy humor at times. I mean, everyone assumed this was going to suck. When I was originally putting together this list, I was thinking about putting The Walking Dead but in hindsight, there was a lot of positivity about that game going on. People were generally positive about Telltale's Sam and Max nobody games. Played or remembered their crappy Jurassic Park and Order games. So generally people were kind of excited to see what Telltale could do with The Walking Dead. They managed to hit that game out of the park. And it led to the real Telltale renaissance. But behind the scenes, begins, things were already starting to fall apart. The studio head didn't like The Walking Dead's lead design and writing staff getting all the credit for the game's success, began inserting himself into creative and generally making himself a nuisance with all the games they were making. Telltale also signed up for too many games. The staff was overworked, constantly rushing to get these things out. The quality was just starting to slip. Ended up being launched at the same time as the Game of Thrones game and wildest internally put way more effort into the Game of Thrones project. Inexplicably ended up being a much better game. It's also just inexplicable how good Tales of the Borderlands is compared to how bad their Game of Thrones game Tale is. Also leaned into all the studio comedy from Sam and Max, solid character writing, and a breakneck pace that keeps things interesting. The game actually was really well served by being in the Borderlands universe, and it elevated the world to something actually maybe a little more interesting than it is normally on paper. By the end of development, all they had was a tiny crew of people. On the last episode of the season, all their resources were going towards their other properties. Tales never really sold all that well. I can't really blame anyone for not knowing about it. And I can't blame them for passing because the idea of it sounds But it's awful. Up there with their best project. In fact, for a lot of people, it is their best project, and no one could have predicted what are you that. Doing? Come on. Damn! Wait, hang on! I hold my head up just enough to see the sky. Moving on to No to It's a Mori. This called indie all game. The telltale signs of failed Kickstarter project. The guy behind it had very little experience. The project wasn't originally going to be a video game. Was envisioned as a graphic novel before the dev concluded. The story was best told in the video game. It was built in RPG Maker, and the creator is clearly one of those artistic eccentrics. Had a lot of interesting but not ideas, always the drive and motivation to make the dreams at least on their own. Oftentimes having a team is what makes that type of person work out, so to speak. It also ended up suffering from all the classic Kickstarter issues, the funds eventually drying up, switching engines mid-development, and a lot of long delays. If you were around during the big Kickstarter boom, funded a lot of projects. What I'm talking about? A lot of games like this were never finished, or they ended up being a disappointing shadow of what was originally promised. That kind of thing, Amore finally came out late. It blew past all expectations. It was a fantastic and fascinating RPG. Probably one of the better Kickstarter success stories even. And finally, at No, won its Batman Arkham Asylum. Admit it, you thought Arkham Asylum was gonna suck, right? Don't pretend you didn't. Everybody did. And then we all played the demo and we all shut the hell up. Before Arkham Asylum, Rocksteady was nobody. The only game they'd ever made up to that Xbox shooter called Urban Chaos. Right response, it was shovelware at best. It's a pretty fun game, I'll not lie to you. But not because it's innovative or because of its scale. It's just a fun, dorky little game. Has no ambition, nothing like Arkham Asylum. Somehow this nobody developer rolled in out of nowhere and completely revolutionized both stealth and combat both from early previews. It just looked like another crappy game like Batman before his track record. Haha. It wasn't good for a certain period in the game's industry. Common knowledge was that DMOS actually hurt sales more than Stupid. The only way that it hurts your sales is if your game isn't good enough to buy. Arkham Asylum is literally proof that I am correct about DMOS, and that they all were not. Because holy crap, not only did I, but everybody did a complete 80 on their expectations of that game. The way the demo incorporated both the combat and the Predator stealth. It was brilliant. It gave you a taste of both and left you wanting more. It goes without saying this is a classic. It's one of the best superhero games ever made, but it looked like an oddity from a studio nobody had ever heard of.